Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hello everyone. I hope that all of you are okay. As you know, today we are going to teach you about the chapter number 11. As you see here, Victorian age started in 1850 up to 1900. But as usual, before we going to uh, teach you the chapter number 11, let me remind you about the previous lecture, which was talking about the age of Romanticism in part 2. In Age of Romanticism, if you remember, I told you about Shelley, uh, something about him, how he was one of the major English Romantic poets, and also as American literary critic Plume also described him as a superb craftsman, a lyric poet without a rival, and also surely one of the most advanced skeptical intellects over to write a poem. So we talk about how in reading Shelley's longer poems, one must remember also that there are the poet with two distinct men. And also we talk about the prose writers of romantic period or of the romantic period, yeah. In the 18th century, I told you how it changed and had taken place in a prose style. And I told you about the many 18th century prose writers depends on the assumption about the suitability of various prose style. And also I gave you about the Charles Lamb that he born in 1775 up to 1834. I told you about Charles Lamb, how he was also an English prose writer, and how he give us more interesting or write as a writer than his influence in suspect. Also, I told you about his Lamb's greatest achievements, which he remarkable as literature and essays also. So therefore, many things we talk about the chapters number 10, and I told you that you have to understand this age because it is important to know the age of Romanticism. And after that, we are going to tell you about the part one in chapter number 11 here, Victorian age, as you see in 1850 up to 1900. So let us go now, move to me to the contents here and look first section. I'll tell you about the introductions of this century. Now after that I'll tell you about the historical summary of the Victorian age. Then we will talk about the poets of the poets of the Victorian age. Like first one is Alfred Tennyson, which born in 1809 up to 1892. After that, and final sections will be Rupert Browning, 1812 until 1889. So if you move here to this slice, you will find that in this slice, the first of all, we will talk about the introductions of Victorian period. The Victorian era, as you see, of a British history was the period of Queen Victoria, reign in from 1837 until her death in 1901 or 19. It's about, and it was also a long period of a peace, a prosperity, refined cultural, great advancements, and also we can say in technology and national self-confidence for Britain. So therefore, during the Victorian age, Britain was the world's most powerful nation. By the end of Victorian reign, the British Empire extended over about one-fifth of the earth surface. Like Elizabethan England, Victorian England also saw a great expansion of wealth, power, and cultural. But as you see here, in Victorian England was a time of great ambition and a grandeur. It was also time of misery, secure, and also urban agencies. So this is something about the introductions of this century. As I can say that in 19th century, we can say that one of rapid developments and the change here. In this change, we can say during the period England, it changed from a rural agricultural country to an urban, also industrial one. So this involved a massive or disciplinations and also radically let me see nature of society here. It took many years for both government and people to adjust to the new conditions. So we can say that this period now, I mean Victorians here, started in 1850 and also ended with the Queen Victorian death as we know in 1991. So therefore, we can say that it was until the outbreak of the World War I in 1914. This is the introductions now, and let us talk about the historical summary of this period. In historical summary, as you see, in the years 1837, Queen Victoria ascended the throne of the Great Britain and Ireland, and also succeeded William the Fourth. She served for a period of 64 years till her death in 1901, and also we can say that it is one of the longest reign in the history of England. The period was marked by many important social and historic change that altered the nations in many ways. The population nearly doubled, and also the British Empire expanded exponentially, and also technically and industrial progress helped Britain become the most powerful country in the world. That is right, strictly speaking here, if we want to speak, that the Victorian era, when it began, give many advantage here, and we can see roughly from the Napoleon wars until the outbreak of World War in 1914. This country saw economic progress, poverty also, and explanations were also equally parts of it. So this is the early of Victorian age here in these chapters, and we have also characteristics of this age. These characteristics is important, as you know. Felt the first one is impact of industrial revolutions. The second, implications also of science, not good for philosophy and religion. Romantic philosophy still here, there, but was at odds with the rest of war. Out finally of conflict came a literatures of questioning and doubt. So here, while the country saw the economic progress, poverty and explanations were also equal part of it. The gap between the rich and the poor increased. In this, if we want to talk about the characteristics, I can see that the gap between the rich and the poor increased significantly, and also the drive for materials and commercial success was seen also to propagate a kind of moral decay in the society itself. The change landscape also of the country was another concern in these characteristics, while also the earlier phase of Romanticism saw celebrations of the countryside and rich landscape also of the flora, and for the Victorian here era saw a changing of landscape to one of foregoing industries and also factories. This is here the characteristics or the main characteristics of this age. Now we talked about the historical summary and the introductions of Victorian age in the previous slides. Now we are going to tell you about the first period here, or the poets of the Victorian age. The first one is Alfred Tenson's. I choose it for you, born in 1809 up to 1892. So these poets of Victorian age, one by one here, we started by Lord Tennyson. Alfred Tennyson, as you see here, first born Tennyson 6 August in 1809. He born up to 6 October 1892 and was poet laureate of the United Kingdom, and also is one of the most popular English poets. We consider him. Keep your interest in these slides about the autobiography of Tennyson here. The early life of Tennyson, Alfred Tennyson, was born in Somerby, Lincolnshire, a rector's son and one of 12 children. He is one of the descendants of King Edward III of England. So Tennyson here and two of his elder brothers were writing poetry in their teens, and also a collection of poems by all three was published locally when Alfred was only 17. So Alfred here, we can, or Tenson's, we can say many things about his life, that we can say that he is achievely remembered as the most representative poet of the Victorian age. Keep it in mind. Tennyson's here is achievely remembered as the most representative poet of the Victorian age. He was a national poet whose poetry reflected the various important tendencies of his time. Third, that is why he was popular in his own day, because his one poetry is so representative of his age and also apt to be less universal in his appeal. So also here, if you want to talk about his work, first, Tennyson's poetry is not so much be studied as to be read and appreciated. He is a poet to have open on one's table and to enjoy as one enjoys his daily exercises. And second here, we should by all means begin to get acquainted with Tennyson in the days of our youth. Unlike Browning here, who is generally appreciated by more mature mind, I mean here Browning, Tennyson's on other hand, he is for enjoyment, for inspiration, rather than for instructions. This is if we want to make a comparison or contrast between Browning and Tennyson's. Now also we are talking about the still very famous work of Tennyson's. Tennyson's first publications was poems, chiefly lyrical poems here in 1830, which included the popular poem Marina. The second work, his second book, Poems 1833, also received mixed review, after which ceased to write for 10 years. Third, he wrote in Memoriam, AHH in memory of his closest friends Arthur Hallam and the lady finally of Charlotte, the Lotus Eaters Mort, the Arthur and Alice's appeared in 1842 in the two-volume poems, which established his reputation as a writer. So this is something about his famous work, and we also can add that Alfred here, Lord Tennyson's, is one of the most famous poets, as I told you just now, in English literatures, and many of his poems, you have to know, that are standards of 19th century literatures and are critically and popular favorite. So the body of a critical work on him is immense, and although some of his work is seen as too sentimental today, his intellectual contributions to poetry and metaphysicals are undeniable. So this is something about the work, or the famous work of Tennyson's, what he also introduced to English literatures at Victoria or in Victorian age. So now let us go to talk about Robert Browning, as you see here. Robert Browning in 1812, 1889, First of all, we can see that he's one of the most eminent poets. The second, he approaches in his language and emerged poetry of our time. Third, his writing is anti-romantic with railway, train, and also figure, and the language is often colloquial and even slang. The final things is that the poem My Last Duchess is a prime examples of a dramatic monologue for him or form for him. This is also Robert Browning. All of his poems, you have to know, may be divided into three classes. The first, as you see here, the pure drama, like Strafford and Blue in the Scotian, a dramatic narrative, also like Pippa Passes, which are also dramatic in form, but were not meant to be acted, and also dramatic lyric like The Last Ride Together, which are short poems expressing some strong personal emotions or describing some dramatic episodes in human life, and in which the hero himself generally tell the story. I'm talking about The Last Ride Together. So, Browning is often compared with Shakespeare. The reader will understand that he has very little of Shakespeare's dramatic talent. So I can add it here that Robert Browning was also an English poet and the playwright whose dramatic monologues, especially in a dramatic monologue, puts him among the foremost Victorian poets. His poems are noted for irony, characterizations, dark humor, social commentary, historical setting, and let me say challenging vocabulary and syntax. So his career began well but shrank for a time. His critical reputations rests mainly on his dramatic monologues, in which the words not only convey setting and actions, but reveal the speaker's characters. So I can see that in a Browning monologue, unlike a soliloquy, the meaning is not what the speaker voluntarily reveals, but what he in, inadvertently gives away, usually while rationalizing past actions or special pleading his case to a silent auditor. So this is what can we say about the dramatic monologues of Robert Browning and what he introduced as a poet or as a playwright. So therefore, this is everything about this lecture, and I hope that you understand it as important also in chapter number 11. And don't forget that this is the first part of a chapter number 11, and next lecture I'll give you part 2 in the same chapter number 11. I hope that you revise these things as introductions of Victorian age and also the historical summary of this period, and you have to revise everything about the poets of Victorian age. The first one, or the major one, is Alfred Tennyson, as just now we discussed, and also we have Robert Browning in this age. What we say, main characteristics of this age, the main characteristics of the historical or the Victorian age, you have to read one by one and revise it during your textbook. You will find it, and also the autobiography of Alfred Tennyson and his characteristics. I can see the characteristics of Tennyson's poetry. You can find also the Robert Browning also and his dramatic monologue. So this is everything about the lecture. Now time to say goodbye and see you next lecture, inshallah.